Okay, today, guys, we're going to look at the Protestant Reformation. We just got through talking about the Renaissance, so these two time periods sort of go hand in hand. So, we're going to look at the Protestant Reformation and talk about some of the things that we've been discussing in class. So, with that being said, let's get going with the Protestant Reformation. So, when we talk about a particular topic or period, one of the things that we're always going to try to do is to make sure that we have our learning objective questions. These questions need to be written down and then put on your note sheet. But these are the three main things that you should know after listening to this video lecture. The first question is, what was the Protestant Reformation? The second question is, how does the Reformation begin and what were some of the causes? And then the third question is, who were the key figures in the Reformation and what were their beliefs? So you need to be able to answer these three questions once this video lecture is over, and you need to make sure that you write them down at the end of your notes. So let's get started. Some of the causes of the Reformation, and we've discussed a few of these things. Let's look at this first cause. The first cause on here was an event known as the Hundred Years' War. This war is going to go on from 1337 to 1453, so really, technically, it should be the 116 Years' War. But this war was between England and France. A lot of death, a lot of killing going on. People felt like the church was failing them during that period. And then we get the Black Death right along the same period. Again, a lot of death going on, a lot of people dying, and they felt that the church wasn't living up to what they thought the church should be. Second thing is that a lot of the people living during that period began to view the church as being too busy with worldly affairs, such as taking money from people, such as the indulgences. And they felt like the church members, the lead church officials, or the clergy were not really doing any spiritual work. They were more concerned with money and mainly being corrupt at this point. Another cause would be the scientific advances that were going on during this period, and these often ran into contradiction with the Catholic Church. And then the final thing is something we've already discussed, and that was the selling of indulgences. This is where you could pay money for a pardon or sin or reward for good behavior, and basically you could get salvation simply by paying money. So these were the four causes that we have for the Reformation. Also, too, the Catholic Church was sort of structured in what we call a hierarchy, beginning with God, the Pope, cardinals, archbishops, bishops, priest and monk, and laity. And those are people that are not in the church. But this is the basic structure that the church went by. And of course, you can see that the Pope holds a very high role in this whole thing, or this whole hierarchy. You might want to write these down too and copy them into your notes. So as the Catholic Church became more and more corrupt and people started viewing them as doing things that weren't necessarily spiritual, there began to be some early calls for church reform. One of the first early calls was by a guy named John Wycliffe of England. He's going to take the Bible and translate it into English. And of course, a lot of people felt like by translating this into English that it was going to lose some of what it was intended to say, and so there was an outcry over that. Jan Hus of Bohemia, he began to have church services in the vernacular. We've talked about what the vernacular is. If you don't remember, the vernacular is where you speak in the language of the times, not the way maybe it was actually written. So it was more talking like people talk today, more so than probably what was in the Bible, which was mainly written in Latin at this point, was trying to come across with. Both of these guys are going to teach that the Bible had more authority than church leaders, and this again goes against the church. Huss was even burned at the stake, and Wycliffe was later given a posthumous execution. which means that he was basically killed even after he was dead. It's sort of uh, 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 an oxymoron. He's already dead, so why say he's been executed? But anyway, the church spoke out against him after his death. So some of the Renaissance ideas, and we've talked about all these things. Secularism, basically meaning that you were going to put more emphasis on what you believed more so than maybe what the church was actually telling you at this point. Individualism, again, that humanistic idea that the individual has a bigger role than previously people had thought during the Middle Ages and the Dark Times or Dark Ages. Third, Christian humanist, again, that the individual could think for himself. They could read the Bible and come up with their own interpretations of what the Bible was trying to say. And then the printing press comes out during this time, and this is going to help spread a lot of these ideas that are going to lead to the Reformation. So, what is the Protestant Reformation? What was it actually? So, let's look at a couple of things. First off, let's look at the word, and the first word, Protestant. Now, Protestant is someone who protested against the Catholic Church. And then, of course, the next word, Reformation. And to reform something means you want change when people demand changes. So when we look at what was the Protestant Reformation, we're basically taking Christianity. And before the Reformation, there was only one church, the Catholic Church, and it was the only Christian church. But during the Reformation, we get the formation of another church, which is going to be Protestant churches. So we get a split in the Catholic Church, or some people could say a split in Christianity, between Catholics and Protestants. So who were some of the major reformers? And there are three guys we're going to focus on: Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Henry VIII. And these guys are considered the major reformers of the Protestant Reformation. Let's start with Martin Luther, because he's the guy that begins it all. Who was Martin Luther? He was a German monk who was dissatisfied with the church and believed in these basic things: that faith saves people, not good works. If you believe, then you got a chance of going to heaven. That the ultimate authority for Christians is the Bible, not the Pope, which again goes against the Catholic teachings. And that no one is more important in God's eyes. All humans are equal before God. What were some of Luther's issues with the Catholic Church? And here's some of the things that Luther disagreed with. One of the things, of course, was the selling of indulgences. These indulgence certificates could take away sins, and Martin Luther disagreed with the selling of these things by the Catholic Church. The other thing was that merchants wanted usury, lending money and charging interest. The Catholic Church says that usury is wrong, and some merchants wanted usury. And the third thing was that absolute power of wealth of the church, that the power of the church was coming from the money that they were making, not from God's blessing on the church. The other problem that Luther had was that the church was mainly dominated by Italians, which there were a lot more people who were Christian living in Europe who weren't Italian. So they did not like the idea that the church was dominated by mainly Italians. Mainly the Germans and the English were the ones who opposed the Italians being so much in charge of the Catholic Church. So Luther decides that he's going to write down his 95 disagreements, or the 95 theses, and he is going to spread these out on pamphlet, and he's going to post them to the church door at a church in Wittenberg in Germany. So what was the 95 Theses? It was a list of things he thought were wrong with the Catholic Church. Luther is going to criticize the Pope's power. the church's extreme wealth, which we just talked about a minute ago, and the selling of indulgences. These were the main things that were pointed out in the 95 Theses. Again, here's a picture of Luther nailing those 95 Theses to the church door at Wittenberg, Germany. This happened in 1517. The 95 Theses were spread mainly due to the invention of the printing press. So a lot of people got to see what these disagreements were, which are also going to encourage the Reformation. The Reformation is going to gain support, and these 95 Theses are going to gain support from people, and there's going to be a lot more criticism of the Catholic Church once these 95 Theses are published and spread about all over Europe. What were some of Martin Luther's main teachings? He said that salvation by faith alone, that you only get salvation if you believe, if you have faith. That teachings and in churches should be based on the Bible, and that all people are equal before God. So Luther puts out these 95 Theses, and of course the Pope, which is Pope Leo X, he is not going to be very happy about this. So he is the Pope that's in charge during the height of all of this corruption that was going on in the Catholic Church. He orders Luther to give up his beliefs and demands that Luther stop. He would send this order to Luther, and once Luther received it, he would burn the order, and because of this, Pope Leo X would execute or excommunicate Martin Luther. What does it mean to be excommunicated? It basically means to be kicked out of the church. Here's a picture of Luther burning the Pope's order. The Holy Roman Emperor was a guy named Charles V. He is going to summon Luther to a trial in the town of Worms. And at Worms, he would create the Edict of Worms, which he declares that Luther is an outlaw and a heretic. And a heretic is someone who speaks out against the church. Luther would form a new religious group that he would call the Lutherans, which still exists today, the Lutheran Church. Reactions by the peasants living there. Peasants wanted to end serfdom, and they revolted in 1524. Luther does not support this revolt, and the princes of Germany are going to massacre over 100,000 people. So some people thought that maybe because of this change that they could get more freedom, especially these peasants who were stuck in that serfdom period where they were pretty much tied to the land. And so Luther doesn't back this, and it ends up being a massacre of a lot of peasants during this period. So we're going to start to see wars begin to emerge, and Lutherans and Catholics are going to be at war against each other. The northern German princes are going to support Luther. Other princes of Germany are going to join forces against them. And Charles V is going to declare war against the Protestants. In 1555, the Peace of Augsburg is signed. This is monumental because what it does is it allows the German states to decide what religion and what side they're going to take in this war between Lutherans and Catholics. So it would allow each German state the right to pick its religion. Another reformer other than Martin Luther was King Henry VIII. He begins his reign in England as a devout Catholic. He and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, had a daughter, Mary, but no male heir. And once Henry VIII realized that they could not have children, Henry decided to ask for a divorce. The only problem is that Henry is Catholic. And in a Catholic marriage, you don't get a divorce. The Pope could annul or set aside a marriage, but there was no such thing as a divorce. And so the Pope is going to refuse to give Henry that right. Henry called on Parliament to pass laws ending the Pope's power in England and legalize his divorce. In 1534, Henry breaks from the Catholic Church and declared himself head of the Church of England, which is going to be a new Protestant church. It later becomes the Anglican Church. Henry would marry 6 times. Here's a listing of his 6 wives. Here's a listing of their children. And here is when or what happened to them as far as their death. Another key figure was Queen Elizabeth I. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. She combined Catholic styles with Protestant teachings to sort of please both religions in England. This is going to help make Elizabeth one of England's most popular leaders. Elizabeth I makes the Anglican Church the official church of all of Great Britain. And in between, we talked about this too. Her other half-sister, Bloody Mary, would take over for a while before Elizabeth assumes the throne. Bloody Mary tried to take England back to being Catholic, and she burned a lot of Protestants at the stake, therefore that she got her nickname Bloody Mary. John Calvin is another major reformer. His ideas hit the church with a POW, and here's what POW stands for. The P stands for predestination, that God chooses who goes to heaven, and you don't get there by good works. So sort of backing some of the ideas of Luther. The O stands for our moral lives will reveal if we're chosen by God to go to heaven or to hell. And the W is that work ethic, righteous life, lead a righteous life that honors God. And those were his 3 things that Calvin believed in strongly as far as salvation and heaven and hell. Predestination, once again, that salvation comes through predestination, that God has already determined. And at birth, it is decided if you will go to heaven or if you will go to hell. That is predestination, and that was one of John Calvin's main beliefs. Calvinism, which is named after John Calvin, started in Switzerland. Calvin went to Geneva, Switzerland, and led the city. He believed that the ideal government was a theocracy. And if you don't know what a theocracy is, you definitely want to write this down. This is when a government is controlled by religious leaders, such as John Calvin. John Knox is another interesting reformer during this period. He visited John Calvin and liked a lot of his ideas. He is from Ireland, or Scotland, excuse me, and he goes back to Scotland and carries these ideas, and later the group that would follow John Knox are going to be known as Presbyterians. The Anabaptists is a group that emerges during the Reformation as well. This was another Christian group that would split off. Anabaptist means to baptize again. And the main belief of them were that they believed that only people who were old enough to decide to be Christian should be baptized. A lot of these Anabaptists were persecuted all across Europe. So what we get at the end here is Christianity splits. We get Catholics and we get Protestant. That's the main gist of the Reformation. We have a split in Christianity, a split in the Catholic Church. You get Catholics and Protestants out of the Reformation. The Protestant side would split even more with the formation of the Lutheran Church and Calvinism. Calvinism would eventually result into people becoming Puritans, who eventually settle America. Puritans and Pilgrims, same group. We saw the French Huguenots that are going to emerge. And we also saw the Presbyterians emerge, all out of Calvinism. So let's go back to our learning objective questions. Again, you want to answer these three questions, write them down again, and make sure that you understand the answers to those questions and that you have gone back and reviewed your notes before you try to answer them. So number one, what was the Protestant Reformation? Number two, how does the Reformation begin and what were some of the causes? And number three, who were the key figures in the Reformation and what were their beliefs? So if you can answer those three after reviewing your notes, then you're in good shape. Hopefully that's a good review and you've gotten all this. Feel free to jot down any other questions or concerns that you might have, and we can go over those things in class. Okay, we'll catch you guys later.